Well, good morning. This is Barry Odell with the Church of Christ at Mammoth Spring Facebook page, and it is Wednesday morning, July 27th, 2029. Good to see folks joining on. Brian, Sally, Laura, Lyle, Jean, good to see all of you guys on here today. Of course, we're also cross-posted onto the Near Churches page, and as always, if you guys have any questions, morning, Gail. If you guys have any questions or comments about what we're studying, please feel free to use the comment section, and I will address them when I see them. I got my text straightened out today, so I'm happy for that. Anyway, hey Michelle, good to see you. All right, we are ready for 2 Corinthians chapter 10, but I want to address something real quickly. In fact, let me do this real quick. I received a question yesterday after the live stream, and I've got to find it here. Okay, I've got it here. So, here's the question. So we were talking in 2 Corinthians chapters 8 and 9 about the contribution, and the specificity of that contribution was to the needy saints in Jerusalem. So here's the question. It's a good question, by the way. If I purpose to give a certain amount, and something comes up that I'm unable to give that amount, is it a sin if I cannot give? Good question. My initial response to that was, do you want me to address this personally, or would you like a video, like in tomorrow's video? So I said this: I have a feeling you're not the only one who struggles with that. So I thought about this question, and I want to take just a minute to answer that before we get into 2 Corinthians chapter 10. Good morning, Lottie. So I purpose in my heart, something comes up, and is it then a sin if I am not able to give? So let me do this real quickly. I'm going to pull up here. I'm still getting used to this program here. 1 Corinthians 16. All right. So you guys can see what I'm doing here. Okay, so 1 Corinthians chapter 16, the collection. And this is significant. You notice the title here, Collection for the Saints. All right, so looking at the biblical text. Now, concerning the collection, again, right here, the collection for the saints. All right, this is a specific contribution that's being given for the saints and taken up. Paul says, as I have given order to the churches of Galatia, so you must also do. On the first day of each week, let each one of you lay something aside, storing up as he may prosper, that there be no, and this, to me, this is significant in the text right here, that there be no collections when I come. Paul's on his way to Corinth to pick this up and then move on to take it where it's needed, and that would be to the poor saints of Judea. He says, and when I come, whomever you approve by your letters, I will send, I will send to bear your gift to Jerusalem. Remember, we talked yesterday at the end of 2 Corinthians chapter 8, what verses? 2 Corinthians 8, 16 through 24. Paul talks about traveling with us, with that gift. 2 Corinthians 8 and verse 19. But then he talks about Titus, verse 16. He mentions a brother who remains unnamed, verse 18. And then another brother, verse 22, who remains unnamed. This contribution of 1 Corinthians chapter 16 is not... Paul is not discussing in that text what we typically consider today as the first day of the week contribution that goes into the church treasury, that pays the bills, that pays the preacher, that goes out to our missionaries and whatever else. This specific gift, and that's what it is. Remember, 2 Corinthians chapters 8 and 9 talk about it as a gift and a grace that the Corinthians were involved with. And so he said he'll go with the gift. He says, if it is fitting that I go also, they'll go with me. So you got Paul, Titus, and two other brothers, a minimum of 4 people bearing this gift. But remember, this contribution or this collection, the collection here for the saints, the money that was being taken up by Corinth, good morning, Sheila, the money that was being taken up by Corinth was a collection for the poor saints as a gift to Jerusalem, poor saints in that area. What we have done with 1 Corinthians chapter 16 is we have taken that passage out of context to apply unilaterally to the contribution of the first day of the week, and we do it every Sunday. So what in the world does that have to do with the question that I was sent? Well, if I've purposed in my heart to give a certain amount and something comes up, was Luke with them? Good question. When you go to read Acts chapter 20, you do have what's called, I think it begins in verse 16, one of the we sections. So it is likely that Luke himself was with them too. Thank you, Laura. Good question. What was I saying? This gift to Jerusalem, where was I going? Okay, so we use 1 Corinthians 16 unilaterally as a collection for the first day of the week. Now, he talks about the collection for the saints, and it's done upon the first day of the week. Or, in fact, if you notice here, this word day in the English is in italics, which means it was added by the translators. So literally what this says is on the first of every week. We know that's when the disciples came together. Not only do we have scriptural precedent for the saints coming together on the first of every week, but then you have historical accounts of that too. Not only from Christian writers, but from anti-Christian writers. What's the guy's name? Tacitus? I think he was a Roman historian, and he was antagonist toward Christians, but he noted that they met upon the first of every week. There is a principle here of a collection being taken up on the first of the week. But we have to understand that 1 Corinthians 16 and 2 Corinthians chapters 8 and 9, let me see if the back arrow takes us back. Yeah, back to 2 Corinthians 10. The contribution of 2 Corinthians 8 and 9 is that gift to Jerusalem. The principle of giving is you purpose in your heart. You lay by in store. You're a cheerful giver. You don't do it out of grudging or necessity. Is it a sin if I don't give every... Well, that's a hard question because I don't know that there's a passage specifically addressing that question in the New Testament. Here's my typical answer to that question. I've purposed it in my heart. Okay? I'm going to give that no matter what. If something comes up, it's purposed in my heart. I'm going to give that. That's my answer. Can I say that it is a sin to not give if something were to come up along the way? Say some emergency, and that happens. Okay, life happens. I don't know that I can say that's a sin. You violated a law of God, because we have to keep 1 Corinthians 16 and 2 Corinthians chapters 8 and 9 within context. Now, if I've purposed it in my heart, then that word purpose in the Greek means to set out ahead of time. Then it's set out ahead of time and nothing will affect that, theoretically. That's my answer. Again, because to my knowledge, and I've thought about this a lot, because there are other questions that come up. Well, what if I only prosper once a month? Okay, Social Security, retirement. Well, to my knowledge, they didn't have that system in the first century under capitalism. 401ks, whatever. The point is you still purpose in your heart. And it may be the case that you purpose in your heart a certain amount to give each month, and then you divide that out over the month by week. That may be a conscience issue for you. Whatever the case may be, whatever you give is purposed. It's done cheerfully. It's not done out of grudge or necessity, because God loves a cheerful giver. That would be my answer to that question. And that may not be the answer. That may not be a definitive answer, let's say it that way, that you may be looking for, but that is my answer to that question. So if you have further questions on that, that's as specific as I can get. That's just one of those topics that does not come up in the New Testament. Okay, 2 Corinthians chapter 10, that's where we are. Chapters 10, 11, 12, and 13 are all a unit targeted at defending Paul's apostolic authority. The first 7 chapters deal with that. Chapters 10 through 13 really deal with that. Getting paid monthly, Sheila says, one lays by what they have that week. Yeah, and to me, that's the whole concept behind New Testament giving. It's always free will. It's according to what you have and what you do, and not what you do not have. It's not grudgingly or out of necessity. It's cheerful. And I would say that's up to each individual Christian. Each individual Christian. So I hope that answered you. Well, thank you, Gene. Okay, 2 Corinthians chapter 10. First 6 verses, Paul talks about, let's just start reading. Now I, Paul, myself, am pleading with you by the meekness and gentleness of Christ. You know, there are some false charges that come out here about Paul, for instance, that are being made, and you can infer that by what he's saying here. I'm weak and lowly, or in presence among you, I'm lowly. Okay, he's weakling physically. In fact, you look down at verses 10 and 11. He says, for his letters, they say, these are those false apostles, his letters, they say, are weighty and powerful, but his bodily presence is weak and his speech contemptible. He's a scrawny little guy and he can't speak very well. So what he says in his letters, he's going to be different when he gets here. Paul says what Paul's doing here in chapter 10 is, no, my appearance among you is going to be just like the letters that I'm writing to you. And so he addresses this concept of a physical outward appearance as opposed to what he's writing to them. And these false apostles are saying, well, he's just a weakling. He's a pushover. When he gets here, he's not going to be nearly as bold as he was in his letters. And, I thought about that. It's interesting because there is that principle among the world of social media. There are those who are very bold in what they'll say, let's say in a Facebook message or something like that in a post, and then you meet them face to face, and they're a completely different person. Listen, if you're speaking the truth, and if you're going to use a Facebook message to communicate with somebody about God and their soul, or a post that's public, you'd better be just as bold in person as you are behind a keyboard. There's this group of people that I refer to as keyboard warriors. They're very out front on digital sources, but then you meet them face to face, and they're two-faced is what they are. They're hypocritical. Paul's not that. He is going to be just as bold. He doesn't want to be, and that comes out in chapter 10 as well. He doesn't want to be that bold when he gets there in person, but he says, listen, if I have to, I will. Don't let those false apostles fool you. And that's what he says here in chapter 10 and verse 2. I beg you that when I am present, I may not be bold with the confidence by which I intend to be bold against some. And that would be the false apostles. I don't want to have to be that way when I get there. And he's concerned about that. Who think of us as if we walk according to the flesh. For though we walk, and I love verses 3 through 5 here. For though we walk in the flesh, we do not war according to the flesh. Okay, I'm not going to show up and start a fight with somebody. I'm not going to punch somebody in the mouth. That's not what we're doing here. Because the weapons of our warfare are not carnal. They don't pertain to the flesh. It's not about my physical appearance or my ability to speak or lack thereof, because of what he said in verse 10. His bodily presence is weak and his speech is contemptible. He said that's not what this is about. They're mighty in God for pulling down strongholds. This word stronghold is the idea of like a castle, a fortress. Pulling down of strongholds, casting down arguments. Okay, the word arguments, this is interesting. The Greek word is logismos. Okay, logos, word, logismos. This word here in the Greek has the idea of an individual's reflections, his counsels within himself, the thoughts that he's had. I'm not there to pick a fight with you physically. What I am coming to do, what I will do, is pull down strongholds, cast down those counsels that people have within their own minds, and every high thing that exalts itself against the knowledge of God. See, that's the key. He's going there and he's going to stand up face to face, physically, with these false apostles and show them that he is the man who wrote this letter, and he's not going to back down. And so, what's the end of that? What's the goal of that? Bringing every thought into captivity to the obedience of Christ. He wants the Corinthians to obey the gospel and to remain faithful. Obviously, they had already obeyed the gospel, but to remain faithful to the truth. But he wants those false apostles to be saved just as much. He's not, Paul's not vindictive. He wants them to be obedient to, as he says there at the end of verse 5, to be brought into the captivity of obedience to Christ. He doesn't want anybody to be lost, but these false apostles are causing a lot of trouble there in Corinth. And, verse 6, being ready to punish all disobedience when your obedience is fulfilled. He wants the Corinthians to do what's right, and if necessary, he'll call out, let's say it that way, mark, as Romans 16, 17, and 18 says, those false apostles. He'll let it be known who they are, and he'll do it boldly. He's not just bold in his letters. Do you look at things according to the outward appearance? Verse 7. So I'm still getting used to this here. Verse 7 now. Do you still look at the outward appearance? Or, is it about, well, when I get there, I'm not as bodily intimidating as my letters are? Because if that's what you're looking at, you're looking at the wrong thing. All right? If anyone is convinced in himself that he is Christ, let him again consider this in himself, that just as he is Christ, even so we are Christ's. And so that's the claim that the false apostles are making about Paul. He is not truly of Christ, but we are. Paul says, listen, when I get there, that'll come out. If they think they are, when I get there, you'll know. And see, the Corinthians already knew, and that's going to come out through these last 3 or 4 chapters. They knew very well that he was of Christ, that he had apostolic authority. He says in verse 8 here, for even if I should boast somewhat more about our authority, and that verse here about our authority, that's the apostolic authority that he has, because this, which the Lord gave us for edification. He wanted to build them up. He didn't want to come there and destroy them or tear them down with his apostolic authority. He had that authority, but that's not how he wants to get there. I shall not be ashamed. I'll do what I have to do when I get there. Lest I seem to terrify you by letters. And again, that was just one of those false charges against Paul by the letters. By the false apostles. For his letters, and this is important here, for his letters, they say. They are the false apostles. For his letters, they say, are weighty and powerful, but his bodily presence is weak and his speech contemptible. Okay? Let such a person consider this, that what we are in word by letters, when we're not there, such will we also be in deed when we are present, by the way we act. Such we will also be in deed when we are there. All right? So, this serves as a warning for the Corinthians. All right? For we dare not class ourselves or compare ourselves with those who commend themselves. This is a bit wordy here, so we'll go slowly. But they, all right, verse 12, but they, that would be the false apostles, measuring themselves by themselves and comparing themselves among themselves are not wise. Listen, the preaching of the gospel is not a competition, all right? It is not wise if you have that type of mindset. If your status as a preacher is based on somebody else and you're a better, presenter, you're a better speaker, you're better with your PowerPoints, you're so polished, if that's your standard of faithful gospel preaching, you're not wise. You're just not. Now listen, I understand everybody has their favorite preacher and things like this. I have my favorite preachers, and I've said before, it's not me. There are other people that I'd rather listen to, but if you take on that mindset of comparing yourself with others, you are not wise. And I think preachers need to do better in considering that. We, however, will not boast beyond measure, but within the limits of the sphere which God has appointed us, a sphere which especially includes you. We're not comparing ourselves. Corinth, the end of verse 13, you know who we are. Paul talking about himself and those who were with him, those who worked with him. We are apostolic. We have this authority from God, not from among ourselves because we've compared ourselves. For we are not overextending ourselves as though our authority did not extend to you, for it was to you that we came with the gospel of Christ, not boasting of things beyond measure, that is, in other men's labors. See, that's what the false apostles were doing. They were coming there And they were boasting in other men's labors and what Paul had done, and then they were discounting Paul to try to build themselves up. That's what he's rebuking here. But having hope that as your faith is increased, we shall be greatly enlarged by you in our sphere. But enlarged, encouraged, built up. Paul's work there in Corinth, in other words, was not in vain. He hadn't wasted his time, okay? To preach the gospel in the regions beyond you and not to boast in another man's sphere of accomplishment. If you want to read more about that, boasting in, what does he say here? Boasting in another man's sphere of accomplishment. Read 1 Corinthians chapter 3 because he talks about that. Christ is the foundation. He says, I've laid the foundation. He went there and he preached the gospel. And he said, now others are building on that, and you better be careful how you build on another man's foundation. You better be careful. If they've preached the gospel there, you think about congregations today having a preacher and then getting a preacher after the current preacher, hiring another preacher. You better be careful. You better not make false charges. If he's laid the foundation of Christ and the truth, then you continue to build on that. Don't build yourself up. Don't compare yourself to others. Do the Lord's work. And that comes out here in the last verse of 2 Corinthians, last two verses of 2 Corinthians 10. But he who glories, let him glory in the Lord. And see, that's an exact opposition to verse 12 here. Classing ourselves or comparing ourselves with ourselves. His concern is this right here. He who glories, let him glory in the Lord. I need to be concerned about what God thinks about me, not what all the other preachers think about me. And with Paul here, not with what these false apostles thought about him. Okay? For not he who commends himself is approved, but whom the Lord commends. That needs to be my concern in life. I need to be concerned about, hey, is the Lord pleased with what I'm doing? In that sense, and let me say it this way, as a preacher, because I have received, and all preachers do. Well, brother so-and-so does it this way. I've even been told, well, I've compared you to other preachers. I don't care. And that's not disrespectful to the person who says that. I understand why they're saying that, and it's complimentary. But ultimately, I don't care. Because not he who commends himself is approved, but whom the Lord commends. I need to be sure that what I'm doing as a preacher is approved of by God. I don't care what brother so-and-so says in the sense of being approved. I need to be concerned with what God says. All right, guys, that's 2 Corinthians chapter 10. Chapter 11 is just going to continue on in the thought, and so hopefully we'll be right back here tomorrow, and we'll pick up. So let me scroll through here. I don't see any questions or comments. Just all the greetings. Good to see you guys today. All right, we'll pick up in 2 Corinthians chapter 11 tomorrow. Yeah, Brian says amen to that, brother. Yeah, Brian, you're a gospel preacher. You get it, don't you? And we want encouragement. It's good to have encouragement from fellow preachers, just like with you. You and I have communicated back and forth over the last couple years, and that's encouraging and that's good. But I'm not going to compare myself with you, and don't you compare yourself with me. We need to be concerned about what God thinks about us and the work that we're doing wherever we may be. All right, guys, thanks for being here today. I hope to see you back here tomorrow at 11 o'clock. We'll be live here tonight at Mammoth Spring. We'll be doing an overview of the book of Philippians in our Bible class. So if you're unable to get out, you can watch us here and go through the book of Philippians with us. All right, guys, I hope you have a good day, and I hope to see you back here tomorrow at 11 o'clock.